When you think of World War One, what's the first image that pops into your head? I bet it's the Western Front, right?
Mm.
Muddy trenches, maybe the Somme. But what if I told you about a whole other front? A forgotten one, really. Where the enemy wasn't just bullets and shells, but, well, avalanches. Freezing winds. A landscape so brutal, it actually had its own name for death. Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that, the Italian front of World War One. It was hugely important, strategically incredibly brutal, but often gets, overshadowed. Our mission here is to unpack Italy's story in the Great War, pulling out the key insights. We're using Mark Thompson's fantastic book, The White War, Life and Death on the Italian Front, 1915-1919. Think of this as your shortcut to understanding this really pivotal but often overlooked part of the war. You'll hear things you probably won't find in a standard history book. Okay, let's get into it. Italy. They were initially allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Central Powers. So what made them suddenly switch sides and jump into the war in 1915? This is where it starts getting really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because it wasn't really about honoring that existing alliance. Thompson argues pretty strongly it was driven more by this mania for expansion and a desire to fix what the Prime Minister Solandra called principal problems. Basically, fulfilling old ambitions for territory, trying to secure Italy's spot as a major European power.
Oh, right, because they were kind of the newcomers on the block, relatively speaking.
Exactly, a young nation, and they had this persistent feeling of being the least of the great powers. They were still stinging from things like the defeat at Adua in 1896 against Ethiopia, a real humiliation.
Okay, so it's less about loyalty, more about ambition and maybe national insecurity. How did they actually navigate that diplomatically? Secretly, I guess.
Oh, very secretly. Thompson calls it twin-track diplomacy. You had Prime Minister Solandra and his Foreign Minister Sannino basically talking to both sides at the same time.
Wow, playing both sides.
Pretty much. And the Allies, well, they were desperate and eventually agreed to Italy's shopping list. We're talking land in Albania, the Aegean, bigger colonies in Africa, bits of the Ottoman Empire.
And the big one, the unredeemed lands.
Yes, exactly. Italia Irredenta, Trento, Trieste, Gorizia, Istria, Dalmatia areas with Italian speakers under Austro-Hungarian rule. That was all locked down in the Secret Treaty of London in April 1915.
That feels incredibly risky and, well, kind of cynical, especially if most people back home actually wanted to stay out of the war.
It was hugely risky. And you're right, it bypassed the democratic process almost entirely. Parliament and the public were largely in favor of neutrality.
So how did that tension play out? The government wanting war, the people wanting peace?
Well, you had this big internal conflict. On one side, someone like Giovanni Giolitti, he'd been prime minister 5 times, pushing his Italietta idea. Focus on Italy's problems. Trade, banks, farmers. Stay neutral.
Makes sense.
But on the other side, you had these really fervent nationalists. They wanted territory, splendor, as they called it. They saw the war as this almost spiritual mission for Italy.
And who are the main voices pushing for war?
Well, the poet Gabriele D'Annunzio was a huge figure, a celebrity, really. He used what Thompson calls lyric frenzy, these wild speeches whipping up support, even inciting violence against people like Giolitti, calling him a traitor.
Wow. Using poetry to push for war.
He even got to the king, who kind of wanted war anyway. And then there was a young socialist, Benito Mussolini. He saw Germany struggling early on and flipped, suddenly seeing the war as a revolutionary chance.
So was public opinion genuinely changed, or was it more manipulation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How much was real belief? How much was pressure from these powerful figures and a very pro-war press? There was strong socialist opposition, remember, but the middle classes got convinced it was now or never. And when the king basically threatened to quit if they didn't back the war, Parliament sold it, even though they had doubts. War was declared May 20th.
So the very start of Italy's war was built on shaky ground secrets, ambition, nationalism overriding public opinion.
Precisely. It's key insight number 1, really. This complex mix of insecurity, secret deals, and powerful nationalist voices set the stage for everything that followed.
Okay, let's shift to the front itself. Imagine this. Mountains shooting up 1,000 meters. A wind, the Bora, that's cold, dry, and gusts up to 100 knots, fierce enough to rip tents apart, and rivers that just disappear in the summer. This wasn't the Western Front. This was something else entirely.
Absolutely. And connecting that to the bigger picture, Thompson emphasizes how this unique landscape, the Eastern Alps, the Isonzo River, the Carso Plateau, the Dolomites fundamentally shaped the war there. It created conditions unlike any others in the Great War.
Can you describe that terrain a bit more? The Isonzo, the Carso.
Well, the Isonzo River, it cuts through these deep gorges. Thompson has this amazing image, like a turquoise ribbon through a sleeve of bones. Its lower part just full of rubble. Then east of the river, you get the Carso Plateau. It's limestone barren, rising like a great wall, just swept by that freezing Bora wind. Almost no cover.
Sounds brutal.
And it was a real ethnic mix, too. This borderland had Italian, Slovenian, Friulan languages all mixed together. Adds another layer of complexity.
Okay, so who's leading the Italian army into this meat grinder?
That would be General Luigi Cadorna.
Huh.
His name basically became shorthand for ferocious discipline and inflexibility.
Experienced guy.
Surprisingly little actual combat command before 1915, just a junior officer way back in 1870. But he was utterly convinced he could win through sheer willpower, relentless frontal attacks. That was his answer.
Frontal attacks against mountains and machine guns.
Yep. He even wrote a famous pamphlet, Frontal Attack and Tactical Training, where he actually argued that dense formations would face certain destruction. But then in reality, he often ignored his own rules. He seemed to genuinely believe that a soldier who has faith and courage almost always triumphs. Willpower over reality.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster. How did his theories hold up when they actually hit the Carso Plateau?
It's baffling, isn't it? That rigidity, despite his own warnings, with so little experience, it seems almost like a willful blindness, maybe clinging to the idea of strong will because the strategic problem was so immense, it's hard to say for sure.
But it highlights that massive gap between the armchair general and the poor guys on the ground.
Definitely. Cadorna's leadership is this stark case study, an inflexible doctrine born from belief, not experience, leading to just immense suffering and deadlock on a uniquely horrible front. What he asked of his men was almost beyond comprehension.
So what was it like for the ordinary soldier, caught between Cadorna and that landscape?
Well, that contrast between the willpower idea and the lived reality, that's where you see the true human cost.
Yeah.
We're talking mostly conscripted peasants, average age, maybe 20, 21. Many had barely any idea why they were fighting. Thompson says the word irredentism. Reclaiming those lands was a total mystery to most. Some didn't even know words like neutrality or intervention.
Just told to fight for king and country, basically.
Pretty much. And the physical conditions. Thompson calls the battlefield a vision of hell, constant presence of corpses, the stench, unbearable, mud everywhere, often only a liter of water a day, terrible food they often wouldn't even eat.
And the equipment.
Awful. Boots with cardboard uppers that just fell apart, wire cutters that were like mere garden cicageers, useless against thick wire. Imagine the psychological impact of all that, day in, day out.
Just soul-destroying. But I've heard stories, even in that horror, of small moments of humanity, even between enemies.
Yes, Thompson talks about these patterns of collusion. Soldiers deliberately shooting high, faking raids, quiet truces to grab the wounded or bury the dead, sometimes even swapping things, visiting across the lines.
A kind of shared understanding of the misery.
Exactly, a basic human connection. But then you had the extremes, especially up in the Dolomites. Altitudes up to 3,500 meters, temperatures hitting -40, -50 Celsius.
Unimaginable cold.
And avalanches. They called it the White Death. It killed more soldiers than bullets or shells in some areas. 10,000 died on just one day, White Friday, in December 1916. An enemy you just couldn't fight.
The White Death. Chilling. And on top of the environment and the enemy, there was Cadorna's discipline.
Right. Decimation. That ancient Roman horror show, killing every 10th man in a unit suspected of mutiny or failure. Cadorna revived it. Men chosen by lot to be shot, sometimes for things they didn't even do.
Yeah.
Practically guaranteeing innocent deaths, as Thompson puts it. It was unique to the Italian army, this policy. Utterly terrifying.
So you've got the landscape, the enemy, the avalanches, and your own side potentially shooting you by lottery. How did anyone cope, and how did people try to make sense of it all, maybe through art?
It's incredibly endured at all. And yes, literature becomes really crucial here. It shows the shift away from that empty nationalist talk towards the reality, the community of suffering. You had poets like Corrado Gavoni writing this bizarre, almost celebratory stuff about war, necrophile ranting, Thompson calls it, really grotesque. But then the total opposite. Giuseppe Ungaretti, his poetry is stripped bare, incredibly powerful. Lines like, "Millumino d'immenso, I am illuminated by immensity." He captured the soldiers' shared suffering, how fragile life was. He rejected all that poison nationalist noise, just focused on the raw truth of the peasants he fought alongside, who faced death often without really knowing why.
So the real story wasn't the flag waving, but the quiet endurance and shared pain.
That's the core insight here, I think. The political dreams drove the war, but the true narrative. It was forged in that suffering and captured best by those who saw it plainly, not through nationalist rhetoric.
Okay, let's move forward. Late 1917. Years of this grinding horror have passed. And then comes a moment that becomes infamous. Caporetto, a disaster.
Yes, Caporetto. Thompson calls it an immense allegory of the disillusion. It wasn't just a battle lost, it shook the entire nation. And there were warning signs.
Like what?
There was this incident called the Carzano fiasco. A Czech sergeant, Pivko, actually defected with detailed plans for an Austrian offensive. Cadorna's staff just dismissed it, ignored intelligence. Their failed counterattack was a direct result. Showed a dangerous arrogance.
So they were warned. What made the main attack at Caporetto itself so devastating?
Well, the Germans brought new tactics, infiltration tactics, used successfully at Riga before this. The idea wasn't to smash the whole line, but to find weak points, pour through quickly, and paralyze the defenses from behind. Fast, mobile, exploiting surprise.
And Cadorna didn't see it coming.
He was, as Thompson says, a prisoner of his preconceptions. He didn't expect a major attack until 1918, ignored reports from deserters. Unbelievably, on the morning of the attack, he actually told his artillery commanders to save shells, thinking it was just a diversion.
Just staggering blindness. Any failures lower down?
Oh, yes. General Pietro Badoglio, who later became famous, holds a lot of responsibility here.
Yeah.
He didn't follow Cadorna's order to pull forces back west of the Isonzo for a defense in depth. And controversially, he apparently refused to let his artillery fire defensively near Tolmin, maybe worried about running out of shells. A critical failure.
So the attack begins.
October 24th, 1917. German and Austrian guns open up. Huge weight, very accurate fire, smashed the Italian positions. There was thick fog, too, which helped the attackers. And they used a new gas mixture, phosgene and diphenylchloroethene. The Italian gas masks just weren't effective against it.
What was the result when the lines broke?
Pure chaos. A stampede, Thompson calls it. Soldiers, civilians, everyone fleeing. Roads choked with carts, retreating men. Command just vanished. There are these stories. Soldiers literally disarming their officers, shouting things like, "That's it, we've had enough, we're going home." The rout was enormous. Hundreds of thousands taken prisoner.
Hemingway captured some of that in A Farewell to Arms, right? The chaos, the breakdown.
He did. He captured the brutality of the retreat, Italians turning on each other sometimes. His protagonist deserts, becomes this symbolic, grand refusal of the war's senselessness.
So who paid the price for this disaster? Who got blamed?
Well, Cadorna immediately created this self-serving myth, blamed it all on traitors and cowards among the troops. And unbelievably, a government minister, Leonida Bisolati, publicly backed him up, calling it a military strike, like the soldiers deliberately collapsed the front. It was a terrible lie, but it stuck, staining the army's reputation for years.
So the insight from Caporetto is
What?
Strategic failure, leadership failure.
All of the above. Strategic blindness, command failures at every level, underestimating the enemy's new tactics. It all led to this catastrophic collapse of morale and military structure. Left huge scars on Italy.
It's incredible they didn't collapse entirely. How did they recover from such a monumental defeat?
That's the next chapter, and it shows a really crucial shift. A new leader, a new approach. It really makes you ask, how did they pull back from the brink? General Armando Diaz took over from Cadorna, and his approach was completely different, much more rational, focused on morale.
How so? What did he actually do differently?
His core idea was simple but revolutionary after Cadorna. The best system for fighting anti-war propaganda is the elimination of the causes of discontent. Basically, treat the soldiers better.
Seems obvious, but I guess it wasn't.
Not to Cadorna. Diaz pushed for concrete things. Better camps, cleaner conditions, food soldiers would actually eat, regular leave. He also ramped up propaganda newspapers, posters, theater, even cinema, but aimed at building conviction, not just fear. He made morale a priority, not an afterthought. Soldiers started to feel like their commanders actually cared, at least a bit. Huge difference.
And where did they make their stand?
Along the Piave River. It was a good natural defense line, wide, stony, unpredictable water levels. Plus they got help. British and French troops arrived to reinforce the line.
Was the enemy still strong at this point?
That's the other key factor. By 1918, the Austro-Hungarian army was falling apart. Terrible malnutrition, rampant disease, malaria, dysentery, the Spanish flu was hitting them hard, widespread desertions. Thompson mentioned soldiers fighting without boots and underclothes. Average weight in one division dropped to 50 kilos. Just horrific. Their ability to fight was collapsing.
So renewed Italian spirit meets a crumbling enemy. That leads to the end.
Yes, the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, November 1918. Diaz was under political pressure to attack after holding the line for so long. Interestingly, Thompson notes the initial attacks on Mount Grappa were actually privative, kind of like Cadorna's worst style. Old habits die hard, maybe. But Austrian resistance just disintegrated. The Austro-Hungarian Empire itself was breaking up. There were mutinies, Hungarian units refusing orders, total exhaustion.
So the end came quickly.
Very. The Austrian commander ordered a general retreat, burning supplies. The armistice was signed, but the Italians kept advancing, scooping up hundreds of thousands of prisoners, 350,000 on the last day alone. Many of those prisoners thought the war was already over.
A decisive victory, then. Purest glory, as some called it.
Well, yes and no. It was a huge military victory. But Thompson points out this really dark footnote, how Italy treated its own soldiers returning from Austrian POW camps. Instead of being welcomed as heroes, they were often stuck in camps for weeks, treated with suspicion, even branded sinners against the fatherland by denuncio.
Wow. So even in victory, there's this bitterness, this suspicion.
Exactly. It reveals this really conflicted national feeling, even at the moment of triumph. The masterly breakthrough had a very dark underside for many who fought.
So the fighting stops, but the story isn't over. This idea of the mutilated victory starts to emerge, right? And it becomes, well, toxic.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what happened at the Paris Peace Conference becomes crucial. Italy's sense of being cheated there directly fueled huge changes in national identity and politics.
What happened in Paris? They had the secret Treaty of London, didn't they? Didn't that guarantee them territory?
It did, on paper, but they ran straight into Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points, especially the idea of self-determination. Italy's demands, particularly for Dalmatia and the city of Fiume, clashed hard with that.
Fiume wasn't even in the Treaty of London, was it?
No, that's the ironic part. The treaty actually gave Fiume to the new South Slav state. But Italy, under Prime Minister Orlando, suddenly demanded it as compensation for the enormous sacrifices based on a questionable local vote. Orlando really overplayed his hand, got into a standoff with Wilson, even walked out of the conference for a bit. In the end, they didn't get Fiume or all of Dalmatia.
So after losing over 600,000 men, they felt shortchanged at the peace table.
Deeply shortchanged. This feeling of mutilated victory that they'd bled for nothing, been betrayed by the Allies, created massive resentment back home.
And how does that connect to, well, to what came next?
It raises that crucial question. How does diplomatic failure, layered on top of unimaginable sacrifice, fuel such intense nationalism? It created perfect conditions for extremists.
So who picks up this mutilated victory idea and runs with it?
D'Annunzio first. He leads this dramatic, almost operatic occupation of Fiume with his black-shirted followers, declaring himself the leader, the deuce. It's pure political theater, but incredibly effective. And Benito Mussolini watches closely. He grabs onto that narrative, claims only he truly understands the war's meaning, promises this trenchocracy rule by the veterans, the new men, forged in battle.
So fascism presents itself as the true heir of the war effort.
Exactly. Fascism basically reconsecrated the victory, Thompson says. They built this whole sacred history around the war, framing it as the necessary, painful birth of a new, stronger Italy, with them in charge, of course. The war became their justification.
And what was the real price of all this? The war, the mutilated victory, the rise of fascism.
Immense. Politically, Orlando's failure at Paris wounded Italy's existing liberal system, maybe fatally, opening the door for Mussolini. The human cost. 689,000 Italian soldiers dead, more than Austria-Hungary lost on that front. 1 million seriously wounded. Maybe 600,000 civilians dead from hardship. Total, 1.3 million lives. And then, under fascism, you had the brutal Italianization policies forced on minorities in the new territories, Slovenes, Croats, Germans, Greeks. Language, culture, identity suppressed.
How did Italy try to remember this immense, complex event? Was there one single memory?
Not really. Fascist Italy built monuments everywhere, talking about sons giving their lives for the sacred motherland. A very heroic, state-controlled memory. But Thompson points out the silence of many ordinary peasants who just saw it as a huge, meaningless disaster, a great misfortune. Later, you get films like La Grandangata in 1959, trying to show a more common soldier's view, though some critics felt it made light of the sacrifice. And writers like Hemingway rejecting those big empty words, sacred, glorious, focusing instead on the simple, stark reality of suffering.
So The White War wasn't just battles. It was this crucible that completely reforged Italy's identity, leaving behind these tangled, contradictory legacies that you can still feel today. The way the outcome was twisted politically was just pivotal. So just to recap, we've traced Italy's gamble to enter the war, driven by ambition and secret deals. We've looked at the unique, hellish conditions on the Alpine front under Cadorna's brutal command. We saw the soldiers' immense suffering, the disaster at Caporetto, the surprising recovery under Diaz, and finally, that mutilated victory. A victory that paradoxically fed the rise of fascism and left this deeply divided memory. Mark Thompson's The White War really drives home that this wasn't some minor sideshow. It was unique. Sacrifice, politics, geography all colliding. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How does a nation ever truly come to terms with a war fought for unredeemed land, especially when the victory feels hollow, costs so much, and ends up warping its own future? It changes not just maps, but the very soul of a country for generations.